Hi, good evening. This is going to be my video on the NAFTA article and the chapter 10 and conclusion of the book that we're reading. I thought both of the readings and the videos were very informational and helped me to get a better idea of some of the struggles that people of Central American and Mexican descent may have faced during the times of war and increased migration. But I liked the readings better, as I typically understand things better when I read them, because I will space out when I'm watching videos and stuff and not get the full picture. But when I'm reading, I have to really focus in on stuff so I get more details. So therefore I'm going to be talking specifically about the two readings that we had. So for the NAFTA article, I had never really known what NAFTA was before now. I was surprised to find out that the original intent of the agreement was to improve the Mexican economy, and how it actually did the exact opposite of what was expected, making the Mexican economy worse rather than better, and taking job opportunities away rather than adding jobs like they thought that it would. I also like how the NAFTA failure ties back to the tortilla crisis that was talked about in the beginning of this article, because I didn't really understand in the beginning when I was reading how it related to NAFTA, because it was such an abrupt transition. But then circling back around to it, it really helped me understand the realities of economics and how free trade really didn't benefit Mexico like they thought it would. Rather, it raised prices of their products due to agro-fuel production in the bigger powers. I thought it was also interesting to hear about how the US had a hand, such a large hand, in putting Mexico in the bad situation they were in, and how the bad state actually ended up negatively affecting the US. So it's the US did something bad to Mexico, and then that bad thing ended up hurting the US because of increased immigration. Finally, I like that the article ended up talking about how all the problems could be fixed by focusing on fixing inequalities rather than fixing the economy, and lessening the discrimination against Latin American people in the US that had been caused by such brutal tactics at the border and political agendas. And then in chapter 10, I thought that this chapter had a lot of information that was really useful to this topic that the NAFTA article gave a brief introduction to. So first, I thought that it was really interesting to see how other countries handled immigration compared to what I know about the US. So for example, the UNHCR worked with Mexico to build camps for Mayan refugees from Guatemala. And I thought that that was just crazy, because that's not something you would ever expect the US to do. So I didn't really think about how other countries would handle it. Not let alone they not only let the immigrants into their country, they also provided a safe environment for them. I also thought it was crazy how many Central American born people migrated to the US and how quickly it happened. Because I think it said that it was in 1970 there were only 1 million people, and then when it hit the 2000s it was over 12 million, and that's a drastic increase in population in a very short amount of time. And then because I've only lived in the US, I never really hear that much slander on US immigration policies as harsh as what was stated in this chapter, because it was pretty harsh, and I hadn't really heard this much about the laws and policies that the US had in place to keep people out of the country. For example, I didn't know about the law that the US had originally had that said only white immigrants were able to gain citizenship when they came into the US, which discluded a ton of the people that were trying to come into the US, obviously. I also thought it was interesting to hear how asylum was created, because it was only like 1.8% of people who were being accepted into the US that were applying for citizenship when they like desperately needed to escape a bad situation. And I also thought it was interesting that a lot of the people that the US refused would then go to Canada or just go to Canada straight away because they had a much higher acceptance rate. I think it was like 70% or something. I also think that it's crazy to think about how all the stuff that we're reading about in this book relates to like political agendas that we're hearing about today, such as Trump's promise to build the wall in his campaign, and how that like really worsened stigma around Latin American people in the US. And I think that this kind of ideology to like separate the two countries permanently was started when enforcement was put into place, because enforcement caused increased militarization of the border. I thought it was also interesting to read about the wars that cause people to migrate. So like the wars in Nicaragua, El Salvador, and Guatemala, like between the three, and what factors within those cause people to move. And then even after the wars, the immigration continued to increase, which was not expected because of the negative state of the countries post-war. So they had a lot of inequality, poverty, landlessness, unemployment, or underemployment, which caused an increased amount of people to come into the US, or want to come into the US, rather than decreasing the number after the wars ended. I also thought it was interesting how it became less Mexican migrants and more Central American migrants because of neoliberalism, and we talked about neoliberalism before, so I thought that that connection was really interesting. Thank you. Have a good night.